lonely rancher never kissed a woman in 40 years, until a city girl leaned in and said, "Try me." John Whitman had spent most of his life under the wide Montana sky. His ranch stretched across miles of dry grass, rolling hills, and scattered groves of trees that bent slightly under the constant wind. The house he lived in was small and practical, built decades ago by his father and grandfather before him. Its wooden walls carried the smell of old pine and dust, and the floors creaked in familiar ways whenever he walked across them. John knew every crack, every nail, every worn spot in the floorboards, just as he knew every fence post and water trough on his land. To him, the ranch was not just a home. It was a lifetime of work, memory, and quiet companionship. He had never married, never kissed a woman, and never allowed himself to imagine what life might be like if he had. 42 years of solitude had become his comfort. People from the nearby town called him a hermit, but John didn't mind. Solitude suited him. His days were measured and predictable, each hour filled with the rhythm of ranch work, feeding the cattle, checking fences, repairing equipment, and walking along the fields to ensure no animal had wandered too far. The mountains in the distance, blue in the morning light, seemed to watch over him like silent guardians, and the sunrise each day gave him a quiet sense of purpose. Life had not been easy, but John had lost his parents when he was in his early 20s, leaving him to manage the ranch alone. Back then, he had considered leaving, moving to a town, or finding work in the city, but something inside him kept him tied to the land. The ranch was his inheritance, yes, but also his responsibility, and more than that, it was a connection to his past. Every time he repaired a broken fence or mended a gate, he remembered his father teaching him how to hammer nails straight and drive stakes deep. His father's hands, calloused and strong, had guided him through the chores, and his voice had been patient, sometimes stern, but always steady. John carried those lessons in his bones, repeating them daily without thinking. The neighbors respected him for his work ethic. When storms came, when cattle went missing, or when the snow piled too high, John was the one people called for advice or help. Yet, despite the respect, he was an enigma. Townsfolk would gossip about the lonely man on the hill, imagining reasons why he remained unmarried or why he rarely ventured into town. Some thought he was shy, some thought he was proud, and some wondered if he had a broken heart from long ago. John never confirmed or denied any stories. To him, their opinions were of no consequence. The ranch was his world, and that was enough. He had friends, though not many. A couple of old ranchers, retired like him, would come by occasionally to share a beer on the porch, talk about cattle prices, or reminisce about old days. On Saturdays, he drove into the small town for supplies, stopping at the hardware store to pick up nails, ropes, or paint, and at the diner for a cup of black coffee and a slice of pie. The waitress, Mary, knew his order by heart and always offered a friendly smile. Yet even in the company of others, John remained quiet, careful with words, and comfortable in his solitude. Conversation was pleasant, but unnecessary. Evenings on the ranch were quiet in a way that felt almost sacred. After the sun dipped behind the mountains, painting the sky in streaks of orange and pink, John would sit on the porch with a cup of coffee or a bottle of water. He liked to watch the cattle settle down in the fields and listen to the wind whispering through the grass. Sometimes, when the sky was particularly clear, he could see the stars spread across the heavens like scattered diamonds. On nights like that, he felt a sense of wonder, a reminder that the world was vast, and yet he was content in his small part of it. The animals on the ranch were his constant companions. The horses responded to his soft voice. The cows recognized his presence, and even the dogs, 2 loyal border collies, never left his side. He talked to them as if they were people, and in many ways, they were. They were steady and forgiving, never judging him, never asking for more than he could give. In those interactions, John found a sense of connection and affection that he rarely experienced with humans. But there were moments, quiet and fleeting, when loneliness crept in. Sitting alone on the porch in the twilight, he sometimes thought of what life could have been. He imagined having someone to share his meals with, to laugh at the small victories, or to sit silently beside him, watching the sunset. He never indulged in these thoughts for long. They were fleeting dreams he pushed away because they reminded him of what he had never sought or never found. He told himself that work, routine, and the ranch itself were enough. Pures. And for years, they were. John's life followed seasons more than calendars. Spring was filled with planting, fixing fences after winter, and tending to newborn calves. Summer brought long, hot days in the sun, repairing irrigation systems and moving cattle to fresh pastures. Fall was about harvests, preparing for winter and keeping a close watch on the livestock. Winter was the hardest, blizzards, frozen water troughs, and the relentless cold. But it was also the quietest, the time when he reflected, repaired tools, and rested. Each year mirrored the last, predictable but satisfying. The rhythm of work and nature gave him purpose and kept him grounded, even as the world beyond his ranch moved quickly and changed around him. Despite the predictability, John was content. He found joy in small things: the sound of the wind in the trees, the satisfaction of a job well done, the sight of a calf taking its first steps, or the quiet companionship of a loyal dog lying at his feet. He had no complaints, no regrets that weighed heavily on him, just the steady presence of life on the land. Occasionally, strangers would visit, curious about the rancher who lived alone for decades. Some asked questions about his work, others about the land. They always left impressed by his skill, his independence, and his quiet confidence. But none ever lingered long enough to understand him. They didn't see the man who sometimes wished for more than cows and horses for company, or the man who remembered what it felt like to long for connection and yet didn't pursue it. John's life was simple, almost painfully so, but it was real, and it was his. The ranch, the animals, the wind, the stars, they formed a world he could control, a world he could depend on. And for years that world had been enough. Yet deep down, a small part of him still wondered what it would be like if someone, just one person, walked into his life and changed everything. He had never admitted it, not even to himself, but the thought lingered like a shadow in the corners of his heart. As the years went by, John aged gracefully. His hair turned silver, his hands became more lined and rough, and the aches from long days on the ranch settled into his bones. Yet his eyes remained sharp, alert to every movement in the fields, every change in the weather, every sound in the quiet night. He adapted to his solitude and even found comfort in it. Yet the faintest whisper of longing never entirely disappeared. It was a reminder that even a life built on routine and self-sufficiency could hold room for change. Days. And so John Whitman continued his life on the ranch, day after day, season after season. The world might have seen a lonely, reclusive man, but John knew something different. He knew the value of work, the importance of care, the quiet joy of solitude. His life might have seemed simple, even lonely to outsiders, but to him it was rich in its own way. But unknown to him, life was about to offer something entirely unexpected, something that would challenge the rhythm of his quiet days and awaken a part of him that had long been dormant. It was early July when the first sign of change arrived at John Whitman's quiet ranch. The summer heat had settled into the hills, and the long days stretched lazily under the golden sun. The ranch had grown quiet in the usual way. Cows grazing in the fields, horses nuzzling each other near the stable, and the wind carrying the faint scent of wildflowers from the distant meadows. John was repairing a broken fence near the northern pasture when he noticed a truck slowly winding its way up the dirt road. He squinted against the sun, curious but not alarmed. Visitors were rare, especially in the heat of summer, and he hadn't expected anyone.
The truck stopped at the edge of the property, and a young woman stepped out.
She was dressed in light clothing that looked more suited for the city than a ranch, and she carried a small bag over her shoulder. Her hair was tied back in a loose ponytail, and her eyes held a spark of curiosity that immediately set her apart from the cautious, polite townsfolk John was used to. She glanced around, taking in the wide fields and the wooden house perched on the hill, and then turned her gaze toward him. John wiped his hands on a rag and walked toward the fence. Rasp. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice steady but carrying the faint edge of surprise. The woman smiled, a bright and open smile that seemed to light up the dusty air around her. "Aye," she said. "I'm staying with my cousin in town for the summer, and I wanted to see a real ranch. I've heard about you, Mr. Ribby Whitman, and I thought maybe you could show me around." John raised an eyebrow, unsure if this was a polite request or a bit of boldness from a city girl who didn't know what she was asking. "Show you around?" he repeated. "It's a working ranch. It's not really a tourist attraction."
Emma laughed, a soft, carefree sound. "I don't mind."
"I like working hard. And besides," she added, leaning slightly on the fence, "I want to see how someone actually lives out here. Not just the tourist version." John studied her for a long moment. She wasn't like anyone he had met before. Most people who came to the ranch did so out of curiosity, stayed briefly, and left with polite thanks. But something about Emma felt different, bold, confident, and unafraid of the quiet. He nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "I can show you a bit. But if you're not careful, ranch work will wear you out faster than you think."
Emma's smile widened.
"I'm not afraid of a little hard work," she said. Breath. And in that moment, John realized she might just be serious. Over the next few days, Emma made regular visits to the ranch. She would arrive early in the morning, sometimes helping with feeding the horses or carrying hay, and sometimes simply watching as John went about his tasks. At first he kept his distance, cautious about letting anyone into the rhythm of his life. He wasn't used to company, especially someone who asked questions and seemed genuinely interested. Yet there was something refreshing about her presence. She asked about the cattle, the land, and even the history of the ranch, listening intently to his answers. She laughed at his dry humor and sometimes teased him gently when he spoke too seriously. One morning, as the sun painted the sky in shades of pink and orange, John found Emma waiting by the stable. She was holding a brush and smiling. "Good morning," she said brightly. Breath. "I thought I'd help with grooming the horses today." John shook his head, half amused, half concerned. "You don't have to do that," he said. "They're not pets. They need care, yes. But it's not just brushing them for fun."
Emma shrugged, undeterred.
"I like fun," she said simply. "Besides, I want to learn." She moved with confidence, yet carefully, respecting the horses and understanding their reactions. Slowly he began to explain the routines, the way to hold the brush, how to check for cuts or ticks, how to calm a nervous animal. She listened, absorbing every detail, and even remembered things he had told her earlier. John realized that for the first time in decades he was teaching someone who truly wanted to learn, someone who didn't mock or dismiss the work that had defined his life. As the days passed, Emma's visits became more frequent, and the interactions between them began to change. She wasn't just curious, she was persistent, sometimes leaning in when he explained things, asking questions that made him pause and think. Her presence challenged him in ways he didn't expect. He found himself speaking more, sharing stories from his past, memories he had rarely revisited. He told her about his parents, the lessons he learned from them, and even about a young love he had lost long ago, a brief romance that never materialized, a memory that had stayed with him silently for decades. Emma listened with a kind of quiet attention that surprised him. She didn't interrupt, didn't judge, and didn't try to fix anything. She simply listened, and in doing so, she made him feel seen. For someone who had spent so long in solitude, this was a revelation. He hadn't realized how much he had needed someone to truly listen, to share the silence with, without expectation. One evening after a long day of moving cattle to a new pasture, John and Emma sat on the porch, tired but content. The sky was painted in deep purples and reds as the sun set behind the mountains. Inspiration. The air was warm, carrying the scent of grass and earth, and the distant lowing of cattle added a peaceful rhythm to the moment.
I never thought I'd like ranch life this much, Emma said, her voice soft.
I always imagined it as dusty, boring, and lonely. But it's alive. And you're incredible at it. John chuckled quietly, feeling a strange warmth in his chest. I've been doing this a long time, he said. It's just work. Des. Anyone can learn it, I suppose.
Emma shook her head.
No, not anyone. Inspiration. Most people don't have the patience, the understanding, or the dedication. And you? And you? You've done this alone for years? That's impressive. And kind of lonely, isn't it? John looked away, his eyes tracing the horizon. Breath. Lonely, he admitted quietly. Sometimes. But it's the life I chose. The life I have. Bray. Emma leaned closer, her voice playful now. Maybe it's the life you had, not the life you want. Maybe it's time for something different. He looked at her, surprised by the directness in her words. Brett. No one had ever spoken to him like that, not in decades. She wasn't judging him. She wasn't mocking him. She was challenging him. And, strangely, it felt exciting. Over the next few weeks, Emma became a fixture at the ranch. She wasn't there as a guest or a visitor. She was there as a participant, as someone who wanted to be part of John's world. They worked together in the fields, repaired fences side by side, and sometimes shared simple meals on the porch. With each passing day, John felt the walls he had built around himself begin to crumble. He found himself laughing more, speaking more freely, and even sharing thoughts and memories he had kept buried for years. Yet, even as the days grew warmer and their bond deepened, John felt a flicker of uncertainty. He had never been close to a woman in this way. He had never allowed himself to imagine the possibility of love, companionship, or even a simple kiss. The idea both frightened and intrigued him. Emma's presence had awakened something inside him, a mix of curiosity, longing, and hesitation. One afternoon, as they rested under the shade of an old oak tree after moving hay bales, Emma looked at him with a knowing smile. "You've never kissed a woman, have you?" she asked gently. John's face flushed, and he looked away. "No," he admitted quietly. "I never had the chance. Or never took it." Emma laughed softly, a sound that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds, round in dispatch. "Well," she said, leaning closer, "maybe it's time to try." John's heart raced. The words were simple, but they carried a weight he hadn't felt in decades. He realized that this city girl, this unexpected visitor, had done something remarkable. She had entered his life, challenged his routine, and awakened a part of him he had long ignored. For the first time, John felt a thrill he hadn't known in years. He didn't know what would happen next, or if he was ready, but one thing was certain. His quiet life on the ranch was about to change. And perhaps, just perhaps, it was time for him to take a leap he had never dared to consider.
Summer had settled fully over the Montana hills, and the ranch basked in the golden heat of long, endless days.
John Whitman had grown accustomed to Emma's presence, though each day brought its own surprises. She was no longer just a visitor. She had become a part of the rhythm of his life. From the moment the sun rose to when it sank behind the mountains, Emma's laughter, questions, and energy filled the ranch. John found himself watching her closely, noticing small details he had never paid attention to before. The way her hands moved skillfully when she helped with the horses, the gentle care she showed to the cattle, the way her eyes lit up when she discovered something new. She asked questions about everything, the soil, the water, the old tools, and listened to his explanations with genuine interest. In those moments, John realized he hadn't felt such attention and curiosity in decades. One afternoon, John had to move a small herd to a new pasture across the rolling hills. The sun was high, the air warm but dry, and the dust kicked up by the cattle hung in the golden light.
Emma followed closely, holding the ropes and guiding a few calves with careful precision. "You've got a lot of patience," she remarked, glancing at him.
Most people would have been frustrated long ago. John shrugged, brushing sweat from his brow. Patience is necessary out here. Animals don't understand hurry. They do what they want, and you have to learn to work with them, not against them. Emma smiled, nodding thoughtfully. I like that, she said. There's something honest about it, something real. By the time the sun began to lower behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, the cattle were settled in the new pasture. John and Emma rested under a large pine tree, sipping water and catching their breath. The silence between them was comfortable, not awkward. John found himself talking more than usual, sharing stories from his youth, tales of early mornings on the ranch with his father, and the hard winters that had tested his strength. Emma listened quietly, her presence steady, offering nods, smiles, and gentle questions that encouraged him to continue.
You've been alone here for a long time, she said eventually, her voice soft.
It must get lonely sometimes. John paused, staring out at the horizon where the sky met the hills. It does, he admitted quietly. But it's also peaceful.
I've grown used to it.
I like the routine. The work keeps me busy. The animals, they keep me company. Emma tilted her head, studying him. But doesn't it get lonely for more? She asked, her tone careful but direct. For human connection?
John felt a flicker of surprise.
No one had ever asked him that so openly. He looked down, fumbling with the edge of his shirt. I've never had the chance, he said softly. Or maybe I never took it. Emma leaned a little closer, her eyes meeting his. Breaths. Sometimes, she said gently, you have to take a chance, even if it's scary. John swallowed, feeling a strange warmth in his chest.
Her words were simple, but they carried a weight he hadn't felt in decades.
He realized that Emma had done something remarkable. She had crossed into the quiet, ordered life he had built, and awakened feelings he had long ignored. Over the next few days, their bond deepened. Emma helped with the chores, but also stayed for meals and evening conversations on the porch. John began to notice how much he looked forward to her laughter, the way she asked questions, and the gentle teasing that seemed to poke at the walls he had built around himself. She wasn't trying to rush him. She wasn't judgmental, but she challenged him in ways he hadn't realized he needed. One evening, after a particularly long day moving hay bales, John and Emma sat on the porch steps watching the sky turn deep purple as the sun set. The world seemed quieter than usual, as if holding its breath.
Emma leaned back, brushing a strand of hair from her face.
Breaths.
John, she said softly, you're not like anyone I've ever met. You're
Steady. Grounded. Honest. And maybe a little lonely. John laughed quietly, shaking his head.
I suppose so, he admitted. I've lived a long time with the land, the animals, and the routine. That's been enough for me. Emma turned to him, her eyes sparkling in the fading light.
But is it enough? She asked.
Or is it just what you've settled for? John didn't answer immediately. Her words lingered in the warm evening air, making him think about the quiet moments he had spent alone, the dreams he had set aside, the connection he had denied himself. Breath. He realized that for years he had told himself that solitude was enough. But now, sitting next to Emma, he began to see that maybe it wasn't. Maybe he had been afraid to try, afraid to risk something he hadn't known before. Emma shifted closer, her voice lowering to a whisper. Sometimes, she said, leaning a little nearer. You just have to take a chance. John's heart began to race. He looked into her eyes and saw a challenge, a daring invitation, and something he hadn't expected, a gentle courage that mirrored his own. The world around them, the fields, the mountains, the quiet hum of life seemed to pause. He felt the weight of 40 years of solitude pressing against him, but at the same time, a strange sense of possibility opened up inside him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the soft wind rustling through the grass and the distant lowing of cattle. Breaths. Then Emma leaned in just a little more, her lips brushing close to his. Try me, she whispered. John's breath caught. The words were simple, but they carried more meaning than he could have imagined. His mind raced with questions, fear, and anticipation. He had never been close to a woman in this way, had never allowed himself to imagine such intimacy, but at the same time he felt a pull he could no longer resist. Slowly, cautiously, he leaned forward. Their lips met in a brief, hesitant kiss, awkward and sweet. It was nothing like the romantic moments he had imagined in his youth. It was real, imperfect, and entirely human. John felt a rush of emotions. Surprise, joy, relief, and a strange sense of liberation. After 40 years of solitude, he had taken a leap into something new, something uncertain, but something profoundly alive. Emma smiled against his lips, her eyes warm and encouraging.
See? She whispered. Not so bad. John laughed quietly, a deep, relieved sound.
No, he admitted. Not so bad at all.
Over the next few weeks, the intimacy between them grew naturally. It wasn't rushed or forced, it was a gentle unfolding, rooted in trust, shared experiences, and mutual respect. They continued to work together on the ranch, laugh together over simple meals, and talk about dreams, fears, and memories. John found himself opening up in ways he hadn't in decades, sharing stories from his youth, past loves, and even regrets. Emma listened with patience and understanding, never judging, always encouraging. One afternoon, after a long day of repairing fences near the creek, they sat together on a large rock, watching the water flow over smooth stones. The sun was warm on their faces, and the gentle sound of the creek filled the silence. Emma reached over, taking John's hand in hers. The simple touch sent a shiver through him, a reminder of the connection they had begun to build.
"You're different," she said softly. "I can see it."
The ranch, the work, it shaped you. But I can also see something new, something awake. John squeezed her hand gently, feeling a warmth and gratitude he hadn't known he could feel. "You've changed me," he admitted quietly.
I didn't know it was possible anymore. Emma smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder.
"Sometimes," she said, "we just need someone to show us that it is." That summer, John Whitman discovered a truth he had never allowed himself to see. Life could still surprise him, even at 62.
40 years of solitude had taught him patience, resilience, and a quiet strength, but it had also kept him from experiencing something profoundly human: connection. Emma had entered his world, not as a fleeting curiosity, but as a catalyst, awakening emotions he had long buried. By the time the first hints of autumn colored the leaves, the ranch had a new rhythm. It was still a place of work, still a home to animals in labor, but now it carried laughter, companionship, and the quiet thrill of intimacy. John had stepped beyond the walls of his solitude, learning that even after decades, life could offer new beginnings. Bust. For the first time in 40 years, John felt alive not just in his work, but in his heart. The city girl who had leaned in and said, "Try me," had unlocked a part of him he thought was lost forever, and he realized that love, connection, and courage could come to anyone, no matter the years behind them. Autumn slowly arrived on the Montana ranch, painting the hills in gold, red, and orange. The mornings were crisp, the air filled with the scent of dry leaves and the faint tang of wood smoke from John's fireplace. The sun rose later, casting long shadows across the fields, and the nights were cooler, the stars sharp and clear in the deep sky. Life on the ranch had always been dictated by the seasons, but this year, something felt different. John Whitman noticed it in small, almost imperceptible ways: the way Emma moved through the chores with ease, the way she laughed at his old jokes, the way their shared work felt less like duty and more like companionship. Emma had decided to stay longer than she had planned. What was meant to be a short summer visit had stretched into weeks and then months, because both of them had discovered a rhythm in their shared days. She had no hesitation about the hard work, no fear of early mornings, cold water troughs, or the endless chores of ranch life. Instead, she approached it with curiosity, energy, and a sense of joy that made John realize he had missed out on a kind of human connection he hadn't even known he longed for. Time.
Their days were filled with simple routines. Mornings began with feeding the horses, checking water troughs, and walking the fences for breaks or loose gates.
The cattle had to be counted and moved, hay bales shifted, and fields maintained. Emma had learned quickly, her hands skilled at tying knots, her voice calm around the animals, and her energy tireless. John found himself observing her quietly, noticing how naturally she had become part of the ranch. He had never thought anyone could step into his life so seamlessly, yet here she was, changing everything without demanding it. Evenings, however, were the best part of the day. After chores, they would sit on the porch with mugs of coffee or tea, sometimes just listening to the wind rustle through the tall grass, the soft lowing of the cattle, and the occasional hoot of an owl. They talked about small things, memories, dreams, the way the sky looked over the hills. Sometimes they shared stories from their pasts. John spoke about his childhood, the winters when snow piled high and left him and his father trapped indoors, the rare joys of early spring when calves were born, and the subtle heartbreak of lost opportunities. Emma shared stories of her city life, her family, and her adventures, always with a warmth and openness that made John feel connected to a world beyond the ranch. One evening, after a long day of repairing fences near the northern pasture, John and Emma sat on the steps of the porch, watching the sky turn shades of deep purple and orange. The ranch seemed quieter than usual, almost sacred in its stillness. Emma leaned back on her hands, her hair catching the last rays of sunlight.
You know, she said softly, you've changed this ranch.
Not just the work, but everything. It feels alive in a new way. John smiled, feeling a warmth he hadn't recognized in decades.
You've changed me, he admitted quietly. I didn't know it was possible anymore.
I didn't know I could feel this.
Emma leaned closer, brushing her hand against his.
Sometimes, she said gently, we just need someone to show us what's possible. You've spent so long taking care of everything. Maybe it's time to take care of yourself, too.
Her words settled into him, a gentle truth he hadn't allowed himself to see.
For allies, he realized that for years he had defined himself by work, routine, and solitude, believing that these were all he needed. But now he understood that companionship, love, and shared joy could add a depth to life he had never experienced. Over the following weeks, the ranch continued to thrive, and so did their bond. Emma became part of the rhythm of life, moving through chores with confidence, always ready to lend a hand or offer a smile. John found himself laughing more freely, feeling lighter in ways he hadn't known were possible. Their connection was not forced or hurried. It was steady, patient, and real. One morning, as frost glistened on the grass and the first hints of winter touched the hills, John found himself thinking about the changes Emma had brought to his life. Dusk, she had awakened something in him that he had long buried, the ability to hope, to trust, and to open his heart again. He realized that love was not just about passion or romance. It was about presence, understanding, and the willingness to share life with someone who truly saw you. That afternoon, they worked together to repair a section of fence near the creek. The horses grazed nearby, and the sun filtered through the autumn leaves, casting patterns on the ground.
Emma handed John a hammer and they worked side by side in silence, the comfort of shared effort filling the space between them. When the fence was finally repaired, they stepped back to admire their work. Breaths.
You know, Emma said, brushing dirt from her hands, I didn't expect to fall in love with ranch life, or with someone like you. Oh. John's chest tightened. I didn't expect to feel this either, he admitted.
You've changed everything. You've shown me that life doesn't have to be just work and solitude.
That there's room for more.
Emma smiled softly, reaching for his hand. There's always room for more, she said.
As the weeks passed, the connection between them grew stronger. They shared quiet mornings, long afternoons in the fields, and evenings filled with laughter and conversation. John discovered the joy of having someone to share the small victories with. The first calves of the season, a fence repaired without a hitch, a meal enjoyed together on the porch. He realized that life, when shared, became richer, warmer, and more meaningful. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains and the sky turned a deep star-filled navy, John and Emma sat on the porch steps, wrapped in blankets against the chill. Emma rested her head on his shoulder, and John felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in decades.
Britt. I never thought life could feel like this at my age, he said quietly. I thought I had missed my chance for anything like this. Emma lifted her head, smiling at him.
Breath. It's never too late, she said. Life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it.
You just have to be open to it.
John looked out at the fields, the animals settling in for the night, and the mountains standing silent and steady. He thought about 40 years of solitude, about the lessons of patience and perseverance, and about the unexpected arrival of Emma, who had opened his heart in ways he hadn't imagined possible. He realized that life was not just about the work, the routine, or the land. It was about connection, love, and the courage to embrace change. Over the next month, they prepared for the winter together. Hay was stored, water troughs insulated, and the animals cared for with meticulous attention. Emma had learned the rhythm of ranch life so thoroughly that John often found himself smiling at her competence and grace. She had become indispensable, not just for the work, but for the warmth she brought to his life. One evening, as the first snowflakes of winter fell softly on the fields, John and Emma sat together on the porch sipping hot cocoa. The world was silent except for the faint whisper of the wind through the trees and the soft murmur of animals in the barn. "I never imagined life could feel like this," John said, his voice soft and filled with awe. "I thought I was too old for love, for companionship, for happiness like this." Emma smiled, her eyes shining in the soft glow of the porch light. "It's never too late," she repeated gently. "You just have to let it in." John reached for her hand, holding it carefully. He felt the warmth of her presence, the softness of her touch, and the quiet certainty that life had given him a gift he had long thought impossible. Ranch, the work, and the solitude had shaped him into the man he was, but it was Emma who had brought him fully to life. Winter settled over the ranch, covering the fields in a blanket of white. The mornings were cold, the days shorter, but the warmth between John and Emma grew stronger. They shared quiet walks through the snow-covered pastures, repaired fences in the chilly air, and spent evenings by the fire, talking, laughing, and dreaming together. The ranch was no longer just a place of work. It was a home filled with love, companionship, and hope. As the first year of their time together drew to a close, John realized how much his life had transformed. 40 years of solitude had given him patience, strength, and resilience, but it had also left him closed off from the world in ways he hadn't fully understood. Emma had shown him that it was possible to love again, to trust, and to open his heart to joy. Their connection was not fleeting. It was steady, real, and deeply human. In the quiet moments as they watched the sunset behind the mountains, John often reflected on how unexpected life could be. He had thought he was too old for love, too set in his ways, too accustomed to solitude. Yet here he was, happier than he had ever been, sharing his life with someone who cared for him, challenged him, and brought warmth to every corner of his world. He had learned an important truth. It is never too late for change, never too late for love, and never too late to embrace the life that waits quietly for those willing to take a chance. And as snow fell gently on the Montana hills, John Whitman smiled, knowing that his heart, once closed for 40 years, had finally found its home.